Last week, it was reported that Patrick Shanahan would be ousted from the Trump administration because he had beaten his ex-wife. And so now Trump is looking for, or was looking for, someone to nominate as Secretary of Defense. And guess who he is going with? A woman by the name of Leah Esper. And you should be concerned about that because Secretary of Defense, what does that mean? It has a lot to do with foreign policy, right? Well, she is a lobbyist, and her husband, first of all, worked for Raytheon, and she's a lobbyist that essentially works with a lot of private military contractors. Leah Esper has been a regional executive director at the Design Build Institute of America, a trade group for military and other contractors since 2009, and that's according to an IRS disclosure form. Now, how do we get our hands on that disclosure form? Ken Klippenstein, our very own TYT Investigates reporter, broke this story. Now, her only prior professional experience was working as a golf instructor. So she's perfectly suited for this role as the defense secretary.
So look, I want to clarify a couple of things.
Oh, sorry, her husband has the nomination, my bad.
Yes, and back to the Espers. So this is a common trick, and I love that Ken Klippenstein here found a specific example of it. And there have been others in the past where different companies pay off certain people that rotate through the government by hiring their family members. So they did this a long time ago with Senator Norm Coleman's wife. She'd never worked in that particular industry, but they wanted to influence the senator. So they gave her a very high-paying job at a job she basically didn't show up for, and it's a form of bribery. So here's a person who was a golf instructor, and all of a sudden, an industry advocate, in other words, lobbyists, are like, you know what? We need a golf instructor for this important lobbyist job. And by the way, her job was called executive director in their Mid-Atlantic region, and she remains the highest compensated employee. So that is a hell of a bribe. Now, it might be technically legal because, hey, I could hire anybody I want. I don't have to have qualifications for it. And this to influence her husband? No, we would never. And Esper, of course, has gone to defense contractors and the government, to defense contractors, then the government. That's the revolving door. So the defense contractors pay him very, very handsomely. They funnel money to his wife, and then he goes back into government. And guess what he does? Gives away billions, if not trillions of dollars to defense contractors. And so who's paying the bill at the end of the day?
Us.
You and I are. The American taxpayer is getting screwed. And so this is not just a progressive issue. If you're an actual conservative, you should be livid over this. This is exactly what the swamp is.
Exactly, yeah. So I want to go to graphic 5 because I want to give you a sense of what this lobbying group does. So they push for certain legislation, they push for certain wars. From 2014 to 2018, DBIA has lobbied the federal government on the National Defense Authorization Act, which authorizes the Pentagon's annual military budget. Going back to what you said, Cenk, about our taxpayer money going toward this type of activity, right? And so when Trump says, I'm gonna drain the swamp, just know that he's exploiting something that most Americans, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, feel passionately about, and then he turns around and does the exact opposite. He's all talk. During his campaign, he presented himself as this, non-conventional or unconventional, non-establishment politician. But in reality, he's turned around and not only done the same things that previous presidents have done, he has actually done it 100 times worse.
Yeah, so now I want to explain one other thing that this DBIA came up with, and it's a core part of the corruption. In the old days, what the Pentagon would do is design, bid, build. So what that means is, hey, we have a project and we need to build a ship like this, a plane like this. All of you guys give me bids, and then I will give you a contract depending on who is the most qualified and has the best price. Now, these lobbyists came up with a new idea. It's just called design build. And so how does that work and how is it different? This way, there is no competitive bidding process. The actual defense contractors come up with an idea for a plane or a ship, and then the government accepts it. Now, the government accepts it because the guy who was working at that defense contractor just a year ago is now the government official in charge. So they cut out competition. they cut out the free market. This is exactly how crony capitalism works. And let me give you a sense of the revolving door when it comes to Mark Esper. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush, where he makes those kind of decisions to give contracts to these military industrial companies. He was on the House Armed Services Committee Policy Director. He was Senior National Security Staffer for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he was also Executive Vice President of the Aerospace Industries Association and a defense contractor for Raytheon from 2010 to 2017. So it goes round and round, robbing us, robbing us, robbing us. And now his wife is in on the robbery. And of course, Donald Trump sees that and thinks, it's not the bug, that's the feature. Hey, a guy just as corrupt as I am. Great, now let's make him defense secretary so he could rip us off even more. On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.